He named himself Nathan Hertz, probably as if to say Hertz Donut. This time we watched Season 8, Episode 4, The Deadly Mantis.
But first, quite a bit of follow-up. So Jessica from Maryland tweeted us about 802, which was The Leech Woman. Fun fact, Colleen Gray, who played Leech Woman, had a sense of humor about this picture. Once informing her guests at a party, "I'll let you know, the Leech Woman paid for this house."
Which brings to mind Michael Caine's famous quote about Jaws the Revenge. "I have not seen Jaws the Revenge. I have seen the house it paid for, and it is lovely."
And Jessica was also a guest on the most recent Thereby Hangs a Tale, which is your podcast, Adam.
That's right. I guess for listeners who have only heard this one, I also do a podcast on the side because I just need to be open and free in my podcast relationships, man. Don't judge me. And it is an informal storytelling show in which I invite people on to tell me their most interesting tales. And Jessica tells a story about how a cupcake and Big Bird ultimately led to her becoming an atheist and leaving her Jehovah's Witness roots.
I've seen that movie she's talking about with Big Bird in the museum meeting the Egyptian boy. It's actually really cool.
I bet. I was very happy to find a clip from it and drop it in the episode. So yes, you've heard the episode.
I have. It's really good. People out there, check it out.
You can find it at megaphonic.fm/thereby, or there'll be a link in the show notes for this specific episode.
We also heard from Patrick from Massachusetts, who listened to the bonus bit that we included at the end of our anniversary episode, where we talk about a PSA that Donald Pleasance did the narration for. And then we mentioned some gruesome Canadian PSAs.
Yes, he writes, "Thinking, how bad can this be? I sought out the 'There are no accidents' PSAs you mentioned on the show. The one with the glass coffee table wasn't so bad." And Beth, I believe that was the one you championed.
Yes.
Because the actress covered in fake blood, talking calmly about management negligence bordered on hokey. But then I saw the one with the sous chef, which is the one I recommended. She slips on grease, her head flips backwards, and viscerally cracks on the edge of the stove, and the 10-gallon drum of boiling something spills over her body, and she just lays on the floor shrieking in agony as her dream of becoming a real chef slows away like the flesh on her face. I'm still seeing it in my mind and cringing. I can only imagine that workplaces north of the border were absolute meat grinders to justify the need for that sort of PSA.
I think the glass table one really did it for me because she didn't shriek. She just kind of like, that kind of shocked crying you do when you're like, can't even handle what's going on. Like, like she knows something has happened that's really wrong. Like maybe she lost a finger or something and she like just cannot. And I was just like, that's some good acting. But I agree that the setup was a bit hokey.
Oh, man. But like the boiled face one is a masterpiece of editing. That shot cut, because there's clearly frames missing between the start of the close-up on her face and the very last shot. Mm-hmm. Like there's a jump to put you on edge. Oh, man. And it's kind of like that scene in Sleepaway Camp where the pedophile gets his face burned off. So it reminds me of a RL horror movie, which is just great. But yes, thank you for writing in, Patrick. And if there's one thing that Beth and I adore, it's scaring people with PSAs from our country. Because, my God, there are a lot of spooky Canadian PSAs. They usually involve puppets and drugs, so it's nice to have something a little different to offer.
Well, maybe we should get to this movie, huh, Adam?
Let's Mantis. This time we watch Season 8, Episode 4, The Deadly Mantis. We begin with a world map, helpfully informing the audience that the film will indeed take place in the world. We pan over to a tiny, unnamed area in the Southern Ocean where a volcano is erupting. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, says a narrator who sadly isn't played by the lovable Frank C. Baxter. The quoting of Newton is supposed to help sell the next shot, where the camera pans over to the North Pole. There, next to an ice block containing Captain America, is an ice block containing a giant deadly mantis. The block begins to melt as the result of the rise in temperature from the volcanic activity. Oh, movie, you don't have to quote Newton's third law to sell the title Insect's origin story. If the flapping of butterfly wings is enough to cause a tornado in another part of the world, then a volcano is just the thing to bring us a deadly mantis. Anyway, the mantis breaks free from its icy tomb and spends the remainder of the film snacking on Inuit people, snacking on the Air Force, and generally destroying all on its path. To help deal with their mantis problem, the Air Force calls on Dr. Nedrick. Really? Nedrick? Dr. Nedrick Jackson. Nedrick plans his visit to the Arctic Air Force Base, but faster than you can say, what a scoop! He is joined by newspaper editor Marge Blaine. At the base, Nedrick and Marge meet Colonel Joe Parkman, who takes an instant liking to the newshound. There's a romantic subplot involving Colonel Joe and Marge, but who cares? Unless Marge is going to devour the man who wins her affections, make mine Mantis. None of these characters remain in the Arctic for long as the Mantis flies off to go sightseeing in the U.S. After whizzing by the Washington Monument, Mantis settles in for a decadent night in Manhattan. Our Cuttlebug's bite of the Big Apple is cut fatally short when the military launches an attack on the Mantis with Nedrick, Marge, and Colonel Joe in tow. Mantis is put down by military might, but Joe quickly grabs Marge when he spots the now-dead creature's arm slinking towards the newspaper woman. Nedrick tells us it was just an involuntary reflex, but maybe the Mantis and Joe were working together the whole time leading up to this moment. Think about it. There'd be no chance meeting with Marge unless the Mantis had shown up, and the Mantis even gave Joe a reason to take Marge in his arms. Sly moves from the ultimate wingman, the Deadly Mantis.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, Tom tries implementing business casual day, modeling the platonic ideal with a blue blazer layered over a yellow polo shirt. The rest of the SOL aren't into it. In segment 1, Peanut and Bobo are trying to help some mutants repair an atom bomb. Fearing the worst, Mike asks the nanites for help repairing the ship. The apes are ready to give up, but Mike suggests, without thinking, that they use a pair of locking pliers and a spanner. And with that, the Earth explodes, with the SOL only barely managing to escape. In segment 2, Mike and the bots are conducting a funeral service for Pearl and the billions of apes, when Pearl shows up shooting bullets from a jacked-up Volkswagen bus. Although she herself wasn't prepared to deal with a Bobo stowaway. While Bobo shoots himself in the foot repeatedly, the SOL takes cover behind an asteroid. In segment 3, the crew tries to stay awake during the long drive into the depths of space by putting on some music, but the only thing they can get are AM country stations, or whatever the equivalent of AM country is in this particular part of the galaxy. In segment 4, Servo tries to drive and instantly runs over a space creature. Luckily it survives, and Crow brings the goofy-looking blue blob onto the ship, where it happily devours him. In the final segment, Crow presents the crew with a large meatloaf, and guys, it's the blue blob from before. The gang also receives a letter from Peanut the Ape, who was hurled back in time to 2112, where he married one of Mike's descendants. Pearl shows up too, and swears that Mike will never escape her, no matter how many times Bobo makes him stop for sweet corn.
Well, this is our latest entry into season 8 and the early story arcs for this show. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by this episode. I liked the sketches. I liked kind of the wrap up of the Deep Ape arc. And this was a fun movie and it was fun to watch it rift. What did you think, Beth?
It wasn't my favorite of the 4 that we've watched from the very beginning of the Sci-Fi channel. I think it had the best sketches, so I will say that they were fun and cute, and the AM radio one even had kind of a feel of a Joel era episode in terms of enjoying a lengthy sketch that doesn't go anywhere and gets a little bit long on the tooth, but that's kind of fun. I found the riffing, good and serviceable, but not very memorable. So I can't actually think of too many moments during the film that I was just like, ha ha ha, they're being very funny. I think the one was just how they noticed that the love interest is very mom-like, but then everybody in this movie is, which is part of the interesting thing about the 50s, is all the sex objects were in their 40s, which is very interesting when you think about that compared to like the last 30 years.
Oh, yeah. Well, there is the somewhat unfortunate sci-fi era tendency to refer to her as a man a lot in the last half of the episode, which is unfortunate. And indeed, I would say the last half of the episode is noticeably weaker, but there's some fun stuff, especially in the first half hour. Like, I absolutely love the shot of the erupting volcano, and it's Tom Servo who breaks in. It's like, it's a magma flow of savings at Menards! So there were a couple of little things, but yeah, it's like I think there's been kind of like a gradual upswing. Like these last 2 episodes are so much better than the first 2.
I would say that too. Although I do have a soft spot in my heart for Leech Woman, just because it was such a bizarre movie. But yeah, they feel like they're getting a lot more comfortable with each other. I'm still not a fan of Mike being the whipping boy for everyone. I've always hated that kind of humor where you just have somebody who just gets all the licks for no apparent reason. Even Parks and Rec, which I deeply love, I didn't like how everyone just ragged on Jerry all the time. It just feels too mean-spirited for me. And again, like I don't know what that dynamic is really serving. But they keep with it, so I guess I better get used to it.
So when we were just starting the program, someone weighed in via Twitter and said, if you want to find a good episode of the Sci-Fi Era, he listed a few, but said this was the best of the run.
Whoa.
Yeah, so this has at least one super fan.
It's not that kind of movie where I'd say like you're completely wrong. Like there's nothing redeemable about this. This is a well-made episode. It just really didn't hit me in a really strong way.
Oh, sure. Like I said, I think that first half hour has like a lot to recommend about it, and then and everyone's comfortable at this point, as you mentioned. It's like I really think that the crew really started to gel last episode with Bill in place of Trace, and you can really feel that here. It's like I think they're really comfortable, and there's some good moments. But see, this starred a very special insect. Mantis, who is quite deadly, as it turns out.
Why a mantis?
Well, mantises are striking, and you know what? I'm sure you're familiar with the term BEM.
No.
Oh, BEM stands for bug-eyed monster. It's what you slot in when you need a creature or hateful thing for your story. Sci-fi writers would think of a BEM and throw in a BEM. This got commemorated with an episode of Star Trek the Animated Series when David Trouble with Tribbles Gerald wrote an episode called BEM, referring to bug-eyed monsters.
Interesting. Well, I can see why if you're working from like a model, which is the case here, going with an insect, it's easier to make it look like the actual insect, whereas if you're trying to do something, say, like an ape, it can be a little bit harder to capture the smoother movements of a mammal as opposed to kind of like the jittery movements of an insect.
And I have to say, I thought this mantis puppet was lovely.
Yeah, no, actually, I will say that. It is a well done puppet.
Yes, and if there's one thing that I think director Nathan Duran is known for, it's his work with special effects, but more on that in a bit. But yeah, I loved it, and I especially loved the many shots of the mantis in flight, afternoon delight.
They don't fly.
No, they jump, don't they?
A couple species, I think, can fly short distances, but no, they don't fly like this, and they certainly don't turn into completely different insects to fly like this one apparently does. Goes through some kind of metamorphosis in order to get off the ground.
Well, he has 2 forms. He's like one of those Japanese robots that's made out of several smaller robots.
I was happy to see a mantis. I like mantises. I think they're very cute. I don't know. Did you grow up? Were there mantises in Newfoundland?
No, I seldom saw a beautiful mantis, though I remember being fascinated by them in nature books and things like that. They're so cute.
They are. I used to, I don't know if it was just because I was a kid and I lived closer to the ground or if there was just more of them when I was growing up, but I would often find them in the grass and I just pick them up and play with them. And they're very docile, and unlike a lot of other kinds of insects, they don't really seem to bite humans. They seem pretty cool with them, and they're pretty docile about being played with. And they're really interesting to look at. They look like no other insect, like they're triangular heads and their long limbs. It's just really fun to see them walk around.
Yeah, it looks like when they were inspired by origami and not the other way around.
Would you like to hear some interesting facts about the mantis?
Tell me more about the mantis.
Well, you probably know that they've got a reputation for being cannibals.
Mm-hmm.
So often the female will eat the male while they're engaged in coitus.
Make it sound all sexy, why don't you?
Which is not unusual in the insect kingdom. Like people are often like make jokes about the black widows and mantises and stuff like that. But often insects just let their children eat their bodies and things like that. Like insects are very metal like that.
Yes, and also like at the very least, you can feel good about the male Black Widow and the male Mantis because, at the very least, they're going out swinging, so to speak, unlike the poor old wasps who get done in by the spider wasp. And remember the spider wasp lays the eggs inside the paralyzed wasp, and then they're eaten alive from the inside out.
Well, related to gross things that predators do, mantises like to eat a lot of things, not just other insects. They will take out birds and even bats. And according to this one site I found, when they capture birds, they go straight for the brains.
Yeah, that was pretty eye-popping to me too. And honestly, I don't know about you, but that only makes me like them all the more. And you know what? I found out something because it's kind of interesting. Like they eat birds, but they also eat spiders. And you know what? That's not cool, man. Don't eat spiders. Spiders are good. I'm reminded of this because of course spiders take care of nasty pests. We want spiders around. They're great. So I'm reminded of this great article. Beth, how familiar are you with centipedes? Centipedes are great.
I don't know if you've experienced the Southwestern Ontario house centipede yet, madam.
They look like combs, but they're alive. The centipede is great because, of course, your pal, the Ontario centipede, is not interested in you, but he wants to eat cockroaches and bedbugs, which is good. That is good.
Yeah, they are beneficial creatures to have. Nonetheless, they look like an eldritch horror. I do not want them in my house.
Yeah. Like, you might think that you have hair in the sink, but it's alive.
And they move real fast, which...
With that many legs, they'd have to. But one of the things they do in, I believe it's in Japan, that to take care of particularly nasty insects, they have their local centipede and they adopt them as pets, and they're much larger. And there's this charming interview where this lady says, it's like, I always have to remind my cat, don't eat the good bug, referring to the centipede. So you know what, mantis, they're good. They're not so good bugs. They're more like, Snake Plissken anti-heroes, because you know what? I don't mind them taking out a few birds, keeping my neighborhood quiet. But you mess with the spiders, I don't know whose side you're on anymore.
Well, that's something that I think another source pointed out. Like, it's hard to say if they're beneficial or not. Like, on the one hand, they're kind of indiscriminate. They will eat good bugs and bad. So if you want them in your garden, they'll get rid of aphids, but they will also eat bees. So introduce them at your own risk.
Yeah. And also a little bit of research shows that mantises are closely related to the cockroach, despite the fact that only one of these insects is cool.
Yeah.
Ugh. Cockroaches, that's what your disgusted reaction should be aimed at. They're the worst.
They're really... my now husband... right before we moved in with each other,
he's a cockroach.
He's a cockroach. He had a terrible cockroach infestation, and for years after that, if I saw something flicker in the corner of my eyes, I would jump thinking it was a cockroach.
Oh, yeah. I have also stayed in crappy apartments, so I know what that's like. I know that feel.
Hopefully never again. I've also had a bedbug infestation. That was not great either. That's
what got me to warm over, because I like you, was horrified by the centipede. And then the centipede came around, and suddenly bedbugs were gone.
Really?
And cockroaches, the cockroach population went way down. Because centipedes are hungry and they hate evil things. So you know what? Centipedes are heroes, man.
And unfortunately, you never get a deadly centipede because that's just too many legs to animate in stop motion.
That's true. Oh, fun fact about mantids, they go all the way back to the Cretaceous period.
Whoa!
Yeah. They're a historic bug.
T-Rexes are from the Cretaceous, aren't they?
I'm going to say sure.
I know they're not from Jurassic, because everyone makes that point. Well, they're not actually Jurassic.
They are from the Cretaceous period.
Yeah, look at me and all my Rexes.
Oh, well, there's another thing there, too, that is worth pointing out, that I may point out in the Slack. Now, Beth, are you familiar with a larger size of mantis known as the Kamacuras, sometimes referred to as the Gimantis?
No.
Oh, yes. They grow only on remote islands. They're quite large. And they're known to prey on larger lizards and things like that. I have a footage of them in action. I'll post that in the Slack right now. I think that's worth a look there.
Okay, here we go.
Now, as you can see, the Kamacuras is known to bother both giant monsters and their offspring with rock play.
Oh my god. Who's that?
The little thing is Godzilla's son. He looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy. He sucks.
He looks like a rotund ET.
Basically, Godzilla's son is Bobby Hill. Godzilla's roaring, and then in the background you hear, "Okay, Dad."
Godzilla looks pretty disappointed in him.
As well, he should be. But hey, man, how cool were those Mantis puppets?
Oh, well done.
Yeah.
Well done. I mean, there were much larger insects kind of wheeling around in earlier times when everything was just a little bit bigger. But my impression is if you have an exoskeleton, you can only get so big before gravity starts to really be a problem.
Yeah, well, isn't that like the problem with like, what happened?
I found a spider and I don't like spiders.
Oh, why don't you like any of the good insects and arachnids? He hastily corrected himself.
They're usually the terrible looking ones. I don't think it's unusual to be freaked out by something that has more than two eyes.
I suppose, but I think they're sweet. Like if brown recluses existed in Canada, then you would have every right to be alarmed because oh my god,
they do.
No, they don't. Shut up.
Yeah.
Don't make me think that.
They do.
Well, they don't exist here right now.
Yeah, they do. They're in Ontario.
And they have black windows too.
Oh, shut up. No. That's not what I want.
I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't hurt you. They love Adam.
Aw.
Adam's their favorite.
I am friend to spiders everywhere. It is true. You can have all the crickets.
But they did seem to have a penchant for supersized creatures in the 50s and 60s, especially in Universal movies. Do you have any insights about why that might be?
Well, I mean, there is probably a way more famous giant ant movie called Them! Not Bem, but Them, that tackles giant ants. And yeah, giant insects were all over the place. I mean, Bird-Eye Gordon made a name for himself with giant insects with The Beginning of the End. And like, this is a super common trope, even as going further from movies and like as a pulp concept, the giant spider, the giant ant, the giant whatever. The giant bee, which is something I would love to see. But I think in this case, at the very least, like the monster is just a metaphor for oncoming aerial attacks.
Okay.
And I think this is super interesting to see wartime monster movies from the perspective of a country that's never been bombed. Because famously the giant monster movie from Japan that everybody knows, the original Gojira or Godzilla King of the Monsters, you have characters who hopelessly watch as the sky turns to flames and everyone around them dies. And there's a real sense of pessimism and a real sense of horror, as opposed to the Deadly Mantis, which is all about how, you know what, if the military just gets its act together, yeah, some lives will be lost, but we'll win in the end because we have right on our side.
Yeah, I got really interested in trying to unpack why giant creatures, and they're almost always creatures that are holdovers. They're primitive creatures that have somehow managed to stay alive or in some state and are brought back by science or some kind of modern technology, often by accident, and they wreak havoc on the world. I'm just like, why is that so popular? We've seen it with Reptilicus. We've seen it with a little bit of a twist with King Dinosaur. I
mean, even the idea of bringing a primitive to society and, watching it destroy all the things that we've made is the very premise of King Kong, which we see on a very minuscule budget with Ega.
Yeah. Or Revenge of the Creature again. Like it seems like something that they kept returning to over and over again. And I liked your insight into Godzilla and how it works there because, basically monsters have always been an embodiment of a more abstract fear that a culture has, right? Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to kind of share with some theories about what I think this might be responding to.
All right.
Get my little professor hat on.
Beth's Theory Corner.
So the more obvious one is that, and this movie is not subtle about it, is that the monster embodies a cultural threat, in this case, as I think you rightly pointed out, like a Soviet bombing of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't always work in cases like with the Revenge of the Creature or Reptilicus, where it's not so obviously like a foreign power, even though that's always kind of quietly there. Like even with Reptilicus, which is a Danish movie, it's very heavily allied with the Americans. They have an American commander come in to like set everybody straight. I guess he's a general. But I mean, you can still, like, there's often, because these creatures are often uncovered during scientific explorations, it could be like some fear about what, modern science is going to uncover, what situations are going to be putting us in. But then it always assures us at the end that science does know what it's doing, the military does know what it's doing, and we will be okay in the end. But I was actually wondering if it could be something a little bit darker than that.
All right. I'm intrigued.
Because what always gets me about these movies over and over again is that scientific interest in discovery just so quickly and so seamlessly morphs into violence. And none of these movies seem to have a problem with that. In fact, I wonder if they actually, like, that might be the whole point. Like, it's a celebration of violence in a way, like very clinical modern violence. Like, and maybe our listeners might have some ideas there, but that this is kind of a celebration of a conquering power and its ability to take over anything that comes in its wake. And because they're always like kind of atavistic, primitive creatures, to me, it's like kind of a stand-in for non-modern people and civilizations and how easily they can just be thrown over and taken over. So that is my darker take on all of this.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. Going back to the direct comparison between a nation that has been bombed and a nation that hasn't, and their respective approaches to it. In the original Godzilla, you are supposed to be horrified, and I think they send that message quite effectively. And because the creature in that movie is essentially a walking, scarred thing, this almost undead creature that has been woken up by nuclear energy and those bombings. And it's a revisitation of that horror, but through something from the perspective or from the or being caused by a creature that was hurt by it. It's sort of this fascinating little glimpse of what that was like for the Japanese and how victims are represented both by the people in the movie and Godzilla itself. And then you have the Deadly Mantis where, like, it's the threat and you're supposed to be a little bit startled by the bug-eyed monster. But at the same time, I think you're supposed to have a weird admiration for the bug-eyed. Like, it's a fun creature, too. Like, I get the sense that, like, it's supposed to be rousing whenever the bug-eyed monster shows up. Like, it's not horrifying, like, in the scene in the original Godzilla where Godzilla is stomping on a building and a mother huddles with her children and says, "It's okay, we'll be with your father soon." Like, the tones are so different. And I think we're supposed to have a weird kind of admiration for this giant creature and what it can do, because it's this miracle of nature. And we don't, there's two things that are absent that we sometimes see in giant monster movies. One, there's no scientist going, "We have to protect the mantis. It's the scientific find of the century." It's like, no. We, the audience, are supposed to be awed by the giant mantis, whether that's supposed to be an awe in special effects or whether that's supposed to be the awe of what a creature of that scale would do in a giant city. That is one that's a totally debatable thing, what it's supposed to be. But I find it also interesting that there's no monster loves girl element either. Like, at no point, like, although Mantis reaches for Marge at the end, as Nedrick points out, that is strictly involuntary. That's just a reflex.
See, that was the end that made me think that this whole thing was just supposed to be a celebration of military might, because its death is treated with such playful contempt. Like, there's just like, it's dead now, ha 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 ha. Like, it becomes a joke at the end, and there's no sense, like, any kind of awe that this remarkable creature was supposed to create in the humans around it. Doesn't matter anymore because they killed it. Hooray for America. Like, it just has that feeling about it a little bit.
Yeah, we really missed the scene where Nedrick takes off his hat and goes, "'Twas beauty that killed the mantis."
So that's my kind of working theory, that maybe a lot of these movies are just a celebration of military might that has been paired with science, basically the military industrial complex. More movies than more, but like that's something that really struck us about Revenge of the Creature. Like, to us, it feels like a Verhoeven-esque kind of nightmare, but but the 50s loved this shit.
Yeah.
That said, as Chris pointed out, maybe the reason we're getting so many big monster movies is because trick photography had been innovated in this time.
Oh, and also two things, and this definitely explains the military attitudes in a lot of 50s movies. One, and this is still true today, if you make the military look good, they'll give you access to bases and other things, and perhaps even some financial enhancements.
Yes, there was a big thank you at the end of this movie for all the generosity of the military.
Yes, and on top of that, especially during this time, it's so easy to get wartime stock footage, which is why there's so much. Like the budget is low, they have stock footage. If we make nice to the military, we can tell a certain kind of story. I think in some ways it's less a means of, they consciously tried to make a good military story, so much as, how can we make a monster movie? How can we make King Kong on the cheap? Well, if we invite the military to play with us, we can.
So here's a question. And again, not fully thought through. I'd be really interested in hearing what our listeners think. If they were trying to make a pro-military movie and they had all of this stock footage, why not just make a Russian invasion movie? Why make it a monster? Is it just more expensive?
Well, I don't think, if anything, actors and extras are perhaps less expensive than a mantis puppet. Mm-hmm. But what grabs people? Russian invasion, this thing that makes them like sick to their stomach at the thought that it could happen, or Mantis from parts unknown attacks your country, but don't worry, we'll win out in the end. Like, I can see why this was a popcorn muncher for people. Like, I can see why this was appealing.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget about episode 602, Invasion USA, which is all about Russians coming in.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So speaking of Soviet invasion, this movie spends a lot of time explaining to its audience the radar defense systems that were put in place in Canada by NORAD, I think it is called.
Well, in the film, it's called CONAD.
This is CONAD.
And you are?
The Continental Air Defense Command at Colorado Springs.
CONAD, that's right, CONAD. CONAD.
It's pretty, yeah. It's very, very close to a different word. But yeah, there were 24-hour radar sites, and as part of what was known as the Pine Tree Line, there were 44 sites going all the way from Holberg, British Columbia to St. John's, Newfoundland. Yes, Canada, your one stop for defense and radar.
There's a Pine Tree Line, and then there was one much further north that was called the DEW Line, which stands for the Distant Early Warning Line. And yeah, there's some really, we'll have it in the show notes, some really interesting footage about how they built it, because of course it's far, far, far up north. So how do you build anything up there? And in a lot of cases, they just had to airdrop like tractors and things in order to start getting things built up there. Mostly Canadians that did it, but the Americans funded it.
Yes, and I find it interesting that just reflecting on it later, after the fact, there is a great CBC news piece from 1997 in which the vehicles, it's reported that vehicles were just left rotting there in the lakes as part of the Distant Early Warning Line, that hazardous material was left leaking, and that basically the reason why it was in such a state is that both nations, both Canada and the US, refused to foot the bill for a long time, so they spent a lot of time back and forth just arguing about it.
Yeah, this is one of the things that annoys me most about the way modern humans live in the world, is that they take on extremely ambitious, astonishingly foolhardy, but in the weird way, admirable projects like this. Like this was a 48,000 kilometer, basically tripwire with 52 radar stations in like the distant north. It was incredible that they took this on and succeeded. But nobody thought about the long range consequences of this. Like there was PCBs, they polluted so much because it's just spread across such a long field. And of course, none of them were thinking about the long range consequences. And this never ended up being all that useful because of course, missile technology just got so much better that it was rendered obsolete quite quickly on.
Not to mention, the joke was indeed on everyone involved in the DEW line, because not once did the Earth have a threat in the form of a giant deadly mantis.
One thing that the movie did get right is that there were no women working on the extreme north lines. It was mostly men.
However, the Pine Tree line, it was full of ladies, at least according to the CanCon Alert NFB documentary, which, again, there'll be a link in the show notes. This is lovely. There's a series called On the Spot, and there is this little mini documentary about a Royal Canadian Air Force radar site on the Pine Tree line. And most of the staff appears to be women.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something to keep in mind when you have movies like this that suggest that women are a rare creature that can stop a bull at 50 paces in certain contexts. In fact, there were women in quite a few of these situations.
And, the job is really impressive. So you have the people who are essentially getting in the signals, and they're reading those out. And then there are the plotters. And the plotters are essentially the staff that's there are basically surrounding this giant, what I will describe as an air hockey table, and they're putting these little markers there to make note of every single aircraft or unidentified flying object that's out there, and making a note of how fast they're going and what direction they're going in. And then this is being reported by the surveillance team and the information team that are relaying all of that information to those that are in those aircrafts, making sure that there are no accidents. Not to quote a Canadian PSA. But yeah, it's this really impressive and elaborate job that was fascinating to watch. So this little tiny 15-minute documentary, I think it's even just a little less than 15 minutes, is such a fascinating glimpse into what the RCAF were doing.
Yeah, you guys should totally check it out. Oh, and just to clarify, the reason it went obsolete was because of the creation of intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Oh, I thought you were going to say because of the creation of the internet and everyone lost interest.
And then we gave the Russians blue jeans, and capitalism conquered everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
hooray!
One Russian said, "I believe in perestroika," and the Cold War was over. Thanks, Rocky IV.
Hey, everybody! It's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 fun facts about the Deadly Mantis and its episode of MST3K. Go, Adam, go!
This episode ends with Peanut, the deep ape scientist, safe and sound in Wisconsin in the year 2112, where he marries and conceives with one of Mike Nelson's cousins. Softening the blow of this episode's big bestiality twist is that Mike's cousin and her husband Peanut are both played by Michael J. Nelson.
The letter Mike and the bots received from Peanut explaining how he traveled through time to father the first ape-human child is technically the last letter segment of the original series. As Mike grew more comfortable as host, he voiced his concerns to Best Brain staff that the letter segment slowed down the show. The segment was largely phased out by Season 7 and would only return with the arrival of MST3K The Return in 2017.
To indicate that Crow is sleeping in Segment 3, the puppet's regular eyes are swapped out for a new pair where the pupils are replaced with subtraction symbols. It looks weird.
Did the film's radar-loving narrator sound both monotone and authoritative to you? That's because the Deadly Mantis' narration was provided by Marvin Miller, best known as the voice of Robbie the Robot in Forbidden Planet. For more information on Miller, check out The Shallow 13 from It's Just a Show Episode 18, King Dinosaur.
Director Nathan Duran did no on-location shooting of Air Force bases for the Deadly Mantis and was forced to rely on stock footage. Anything involving planes and real-looking soldiers came from Air Force training films.
On the other hand, the footage of Greenlanders fleeing the Mantis comes from 1933's SOS Iceberg. That film, released a quarter century before The Deadly Mantis, was filmed simultaneously in German and English, and starred, among many others, future Nazi propagandist Leni Riefenstahl. International co-productions like this were common until, Nazis.
Crow comments that one of the Air Force day players looks like Gig Young.
Did you check to see if I was Gig Young?
Gig Young, aka Byron Barr, was a film and Broadway star who received Oscar nominations for roles in Fill the Cup and Teacher's Pet, the latter playing the boyfriend of MST3K alum Mamie Van Doren. Ow.
Mike christens Alex Talton's plucky reporter, the budget Rosalind Russell.
Why, it's as plain as the nose on your face.
The budget Rosalind Russell.
Russell, a tour de force actor, comedian, singer, and screenwriter, is best known for her iconic take on the plucky reporter archetype when she played Hildy Johnson in Howard Hawks' His Girl Friday.
Mike and the Bots also compare Deadly Mantis actors to Bob Crane. Crane was the star of Hogan's Heroes. After the many Colonel Clinks spotted in 801 Revenge of the Creature, it's fitting that Hogan himself is referenced by the SOL crew.
The isolated army men goggling their eyes at a human woman is a trope seen in an earlier and much better war movie, The Grand Illusion by Jean Renoir. In it, some French POWs put on a theatrical performance to kill time, and when one man comes out in women's clothing, the entire group freezes in stunned, eroticized silence.
The opening of the movie lingers lovingly over a map of the world. It's an old, familiar Mercator projection, and Crow jokes,
And next we'll see Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion version.
The Dymaxion map, beloved by hipster indie map projection fans, is made by projecting the globe onto an icosahedron, a D20, and unfolding it so it lays flat. What's your favorite map projection? Write in and tell us!
The phrase, everything's Jake,
Everything was Jake.
despite baffling Mike and the Bots,
This is simply not Jake.
is an antiquated but authentic piece of slang. It's the equivalent of saying, everything's excellent.
As the Air Force officers toss away some movie snow, Tom remarks,
This isn't snow, it's Bon Ami.
Bon Ami is a popular American household cleaner, which was made of feldspar instead of the harsher quartz used in most powder cleaners upon Bon Ami's creation in 1886. The household cleaner worked so well, it got the unusual shout-out from Don Knotts' vehicle The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, where characters remark twice that a haunted house is riddled with bloodstains despite being cleansed with Bon Ami.
And that's time.
Okay, so yes, this movie was directed, I think, fairly well by a fella by the name of Nathan Duran. Does that name ring a bell?
I just want to make a joke about Duran.
Yeah, that's pretty much all we got. Good night, everybody. Nathan Duran directed one of the best films of the 50s and one of the greatest fantasy films of all time.
Really?
He directed The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
What?
Yes. And he directed it the year after this movie.
Well, I gotta say, like, compared to the other Universal movies, this was a lot more fleet-footed. So, yeah, he knew what he was doing.
I have to say, like, Jack Arnold might be a better-known director, and he did make the terrific Creature from the Black Lagoon, but Revenge of the Creature, like, has at most a couple of good shots, but is, like, I don't know, you wouldn't say it was made by a great director, barring the shot of Gilman coming up out of the pool while the two leads are going back into the dance hall to listen to the Gilman stomp. Whereas this had some like fairly nice shots. It was well blocked. The actors are having a lot of fun with the material. It seems like they're really fun, and that's the thing that I've noticed with Duran's movies, whether they're good or bad. And he's made some bad movies too, a la The Deadly Mantis, perhaps. Is that the actors? He brings a certain liveliness out of the actors.
You know, you're right, because I had just assumed that the liveliness was just a result of none of them being John Agar, but maybe it's more the director.
Beth, I'm so glad you said that. Nathan Duran's debatably worst movie, easily his best worst movie, is a film called The Brain from Planet Arus. It demands to have been done by Mystery Science Theater 3000, and maybe one year it will. But it stars none other than John Agar. And John Agar plays a fella who gets possessed by an evil brain on the loose from outer space.
How does that work out?
Well, let me tell you a few things about The Brain from Planet Arus. With Agar, who plays at first a happily married scientist, and then that same scientist possessed by an evil brain, he gets both a sympathetic performance and then a likably hammy performance out of John Agar. Two things no one has ever done.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, he's really fun. There's a really fun interview with him, and there'll be a link in the show notes that was conducted by John Landis. And Nathan Duran said that the script was awful. He was debating throwing the whole thing out, and then because that would just be too complicated, they kept it. But they all hated it, the cast and him. So they did their best with it. The film is totally ridiculous, but because it's made by a director who's able to have fun with his actors and get the actors to bring some of their charisma to the screen, the movie itself is as good-natured and likable as Teenagers from Outer Space. Now, I mentioned that Brain from Planet Arus has a scene, and indeed the whole plot hinges on a giant brain with glowing jack-o'-lantern eyes possessing John Agar. Now, there is a good brain who
sits on his right shoulder.
Not quite. It is a good brain who approaches John Agar's wife, who gives her the lowdown when she suspects something's up with her husband because all of a sudden his kisses are electric from the radioactive brain. And he's like, I need to capture the brain, but only when the brain is out of the body and breathing, because the brain needs to jump out of the body and breathe every 24 hours. And so the wife helpfully suggests that the brain possesses the family dog. So the good brain's in the dog and the bad brain's in John Agar.
See, I was hoping she'd run off with the good brain. Gives electric kisses. Go with that.
Anything's better than John Agar. But this leads to a scene where all the cast fight a giant brain puppet when it finally comes out of John Agar while the dog watches. Then we cut to a shot of the brain leaving the dog's body, and just for you, turn your attention to the Slack. This will be in the show notes. This is the shot of the brain leaving the dog's body as part of the movie's happy end.
It's basically like, bye.
a superimposed animated brain basically goes, Feetstone, family now, and then goes out of the frame. But The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad is a terrific movie. It is wall-to-wall greatness. The cast is a lot of fun. And like I said, Duran just has this touch with actors where, Sinbad, like a lot of swashbuckling heroes, could be insufferable. But with Kerwin Matthews and Duran's direction, he comes across as super charming. And it, of course, features great special effects by Ray Harryhausen. This was the second of 2 collaborations with Harryhausen. He would previously do 20 Million Miles to Earth. And despite the fact that Duran claims that Harryhausen gave him no direction, he saw the storyboards and hoped for the best. Harryhausen said that Duran was probably the only director who understood him and his work. And could realize it on screen. It could help him realize it on screen, I should say. But yes, and then the entire film of The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad is made all the better by an amazing Bernard Herrmann score. It's one of those films that's been preserved by Congress in the States. It's incredible. I recently rewatched it. And I found out that the film was so good that its producer hired Duran and some of the cast to make a ripoff of the movie, resulting in Jack the Giant Killer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in which basically the guy who plays Sinbad plays another adventurer who faces off against stop-motion monsters, and he has to fight the same evil wizard playing an evil wizard, and the boy genie is back playing a different part, and there is a leprechaun who is trapped. And those are basically the only differences, with one notable exception. Ray Harryhausen did not do the special effects. They were done by a fella by the name of Augie Lohman. He did the special effects for Jack the Giant Killer. He also did the special effects for both the Rebel set and the stop-motion dinosaurs in Lost Continent.
Wow.
Yeah. Interesting guy, good filmmaker, with at least one huge jewel in his crown. Check him out, Nathan Duran. You'll be glad you did.
So, Adam, this is more or less the end of the first kind of plot arc that the MST3K has ever done. So they had like a working plot over 4 episodes, which had to do with what was known on the show as Deep Ape. Mm-hmm. What did you think of that format?
I have to say, and we were talking about this a bit for 801, I prefer the Deep Ape setup to what we got for the sci-fi era. Like I said, even though, as is often the case with the Bobo character, mistakes were made. Mm-hmm. I think that Kevin Murphy's pretension and Mike Nelson's chipper attitude as Dr. Peanut, with occasional appearances by Pearl Forrester as their lawgiver, I thought was a great format. And I think that forcing Mary Jo, whose strength is being deadpan, to be wacky and forcing Kevin Murphy, whose strength is playing pompous characters and whose strength is pomposity on screen, like forcing them to go zany when they don't do zany well was a huge mistake. And I kind of like this format. I thought the Deep Ape set looked great.
Yeah, it was a well-made set.
Yeah, and I think that Bobo only gets funny things to do in these 4 episodes. Not all the time, because there's that unfortunate diaper bit from 802. But for the most part, is like, this is the only time he's funny.
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of like Corbett's brain guy, but they could have worked him in. Like, it didn't have to happen in the way it did. I agree, and I think you really put the nail on the head there. Deep Ape was everyone working where they were best, and so that was where they should have stayed.
Yeah, and it got it really got them to show off what they could do in their comfort zones. Like, Mike is playing Peanut as a chipper idiot, and arguably the Mike Nelson character is also a chipper idiot from time to time, and yet those two are really different. And he even manages to make Kevin Murphy manages to make Bobo separate from Tom Servo, even though they're hitting similar notes, both like vocally and performance wise. And I think that Pearl as just the boss, as opposed to a mad scientist, was like a perfect use for her after her similar role in season 7. Like, this was a great use for the show. I mean, I kind of admire how quickly we run through this plot. Like, this is 4 episodes. It's nuts. And this episode feels like a season finale. Mm-hmm. Like, it's so crazy and jam-packed with stuff and throws everything away that it's set up. But yeah, I enjoyed my time in Deep Ape. I'm sad to see it go. And I have to say, like, I think it was probably the most successful thing in these first few episodes plot-wise, because we had that weirdness with Crow and his amnesia, and that got wrapped up last episode. What did you think of that whole story arc?
I didn't like it.
Yeah.
It makes sense that they did it, like, because how else do you explain this complete personality change in a way that isn't too disruptive? But I feel like they just didn't fully commit to it. Like, they didn't give it enough time to really, like, explore what that amnesia would do. You know? What does that look like? How is he feeling on a spaceship with no connection to anything? Like, that could have been an interesting way to kind of build up Crow lore a little bit, but it was always just kind of half-baked the way they did it. So I don't think it was a bad idea to do it. I just think the execution was a little weak. I
agree. And the same would be true of, like, Tom Servo's little hints about what he was up to on the edge of the universe, which, again, they gave up with that sketch in the previous episode where he's trying to sing a ballad and his guitar string breaks and nearly blinds Mike. And tellingly, like, we find out what Crow and Servo were up to between the season 7 finale and 801, but we never find out anything about Gypsy or even really Mike. It's just like, we're not that interested in that. We're really more of a riffing show, and they throw it all away. I wish at the very least, if they did have to abandon Deep Ape, I wish that the plot arc had just been slowly revealing that Pearl was the lawgiver and finding out more and more stuff about the world in the year 2525 when MST3K is now in a Planet of the Apes situation, and then maybe doing this plot with the bomb worshippers, which are stolen directly from beneath the Planet of the Apes, and the destruction of Earth.
Is that what that's from, that trope?
Yes.
Okay. Because I've never seen any Planet of the Apes sequels.
Well, Planet of the Apes movies, the original Planet of the Apes movies are surprisingly brutal, and they're great. Or at least 3 of them are great. The 4th one is pretty good, and the 5th one is unbelievably bad. But they're a series well worth seeing, and this whole arc is based on the weirdest movie in the whole series. It at times feels like Planet of the Apes as directed by David Lynch, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which ends with a bunch of psychic, scarred mutants who worship an atom bomb in the Forbidden Zone. They're at war with the apes. Charlton Heston from the previous film is mortally wounded, and in a suicidal gesture destroys the entire Earth with a bomb. And the Planet of the Apes movies are so bleak. Like, we don't even get the excitement of seeing Earth destroyed. It cuts to black. And a narrator played by Paul Frees, the famous voiceover artist, goes, "A green and insignificant planet is now dead." And then credits just roll over silence.
Wow. Okay.
It was that kind of series.
Well, I mean, now that we've talked about it, I have a little bit more appreciation about just how intensely referential all of this is, which I guess is, might have been part of the deal about moving to the Sci-Fi Network. Like, a lot of these jokes arguably only work if you're familiar, like have a deep familiarity with classic sci-fi films.
Yeah, and I think that's what essentially leads to the creation of the Observers later on, which seemed to be a direct reference to the Gamesters of Triskelion from the original Star Trek.
Which I also have not seen.
No, man, Gamesters with Triskelion totally sucks. You've got to watch it. It's one of the worst ones.
Well, you guys did a good job of that, but I want to end it with one final fact. So, Adam, earlier on, you expressed a little disbelief at the fact that one of our heroes' names is Nedrick.
That's right. It's a name I hate and don't believe in.
Do you know of any famous Nedricks?
No, no one does.
Well, there's one famous Nedrick that I was able to find, a man named Nedrick Young. Nedrick Young once won an Oscar for writing the screenplay to The Defiant Ones. And he was nominated for another Oscar, which he did not win, for Inherit the Wind.
Oh.
Interesting. Also interesting is that he was not able to work, or certainly not able to work under his under the name Nedrick Young.
Nor should he.
For many years, because he was blacklisted back in the 50s. So that's all well and good. And I thought, is there some connection to Nedrick Young and his distinctive first name that would cause the writers of The Deadly Mantis to include it in their screenplay? So I looked it up, and the person who wrote the screenplay for The Deadly Mantis is a guy named Martin Berkeley. And the trivia at IMDb for Martin Berkeley is that he is notorious today for being the most, quote, namer under oath to the House of Un-American Activities Committee.
Oh my God.
Effectively ruining or incalculably damaging the careers of 155 Hollywood actors, directors, and fellow writers.
Oh.
So I don't know if that's why he knew the name Nedrick, and I don't know if it was some weird slam, or I have no idea if there's any connection to that at all, but it seems like an interesting coinkydink.
Yikes.
Whatever happened to that little squeal?
He died.
Good.
He died happy and comfortable?
He died age 74 in Brandon, Florida. So it's probably hot.
Yeah.
It's probably very humid.
Yeah.
Probably had uncomfortable balls.
Yes, and he was probably attacked by giant insects. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you'd like to tell us your tales on the Do Line, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. Thanks again to all our Patreon supporters. You can support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits from this episode and from many, many older episodes by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And thank you for doing that. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/25.
Well, we've squashed this Deadly Mantis, but Chris, what do we have to look forward to next time on It's Just a Show?
Well, so now that our trek through Deep Ape is done, I tried to find a giant mantis to ask what movie we should do next, but there's no giant mantis to be found. Still, I believe in the wisdom of crowds, or when crowds are not available, swarms, and lucky enough, a swarm of regular-sized mantises was willing to gather to pray that we would do Season 5, Episode 9, The Girl in Lover's Lane.
Ooh, with Jackie Lamb, not Jack LaLanne.
This isn't the one with Lassie, is it?
No, Lassie's not the girl in Lover's Lane.
Ooh, that's a very different movie.
Okay, so I have no memory of this whatsoever. Is it in black and white?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Hey, Beth, I hope you like depressing black and white movies.
Do I ever?
I had this one on tape when I was in university. I have not seen it in a long time, but it has a great Jack Elam sketch in which Crow messes with his eyes so he can imitate character actor Jack Elam. This is a fun app. I'm looking forward to it.
This is also the one with Big Stupid in it, if you remember Big Stupid.
That's right.
All right, so it sounds like it's a top-of-the-line Joel episode. Okay, let's check it out. I miss Joel.
Yes, it's been too long.
But on that note, until next time.
Mantises are your friends, unless you happen to be a bat or anything smaller.
Yes, please share this photo of a mantis on your Facebook and agree with us.
We'll see you next time. Take it away, Theme Squad.
larger lizards.